Good morning, good afternoon, good day to you. This is our ICA, International Clarinet Association Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Access Committee hosting Abbie Conant. I'd love to read a little bit about her bio, just for those who may not be familiar. Abbie, award-winning performance artist and Juilliard-trained trombonist, is somewhat of a legend in the international orchestral brass world. The story of her epic fight and ultimate victory against egregious gender discrimination in the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra, where she won the position for principal trombone at a screened audition in 1980, inspired author Malcolm Gladwell to write the New York Times bestseller Blink, where Ms. Conant's story is detailed in the last chapter. The 11-year-long court battle was documented by William Osborne in an article entitled "You Sound Like a Ladies Orchestra." The document is supported by actual court records and experiences in the orchestra with 89 footnotes. This source document has generated countless newspaper and magazine articles, as well as a documentary film, a play produced at the Landestheater Linz, Austria by award-winning British playwright Tamssin Oglesby, and a screenplay for the feature film and works by Canadian producer Dale Wolfe. We are absolutely thrilled that you're here with us today, Abbie, and I'd love to turn it over to my committee member, Nadia, for the rest of our introduction.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dear Abbie, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today in our meeting and for supporting our efforts to make the clarinet community a more diverse, inclusive, and welcoming place to everyone. Before asking my first question, I would like to share a short anecdote about my first significant encounter with you at the university where I studied in Germany, in Trossingen. As I progressed in my master's studies, I began to find my own artistic voice. However, this was not a direction that my professor fully agreed with. So he began to bully me. And this led to a state of desperation for me. And I confided in the pianist I was working with. Because at that time, the school did not have a designated person to protect students from such situations. But the pianist made sure to share my story with all the female woodwind and brass professors. And that was when you, Abbie, and our great Gülsem Tattoo stepped up for me, lifted me up, and helped me regain my confidence. So thank you for your support. I was able to complete my master's studies with distinction. But your courage gave me also the strength to continue and to continue believing in myself. And yes, I am forever grateful.
Oh, that makes me so happy that I could help.
Yeah, I hope future generations, they won't have to put up with such situations. And I hope our effort will help them to not have to face such situations. And for those who don't know your story, I highly recommend this little short film on YouTube that beautifully describes your incredible journey with the Munich Philharmonic, where you entered this world as a young woman in a male-dominated environment, where the chief conductor tried to intimidate you, bully you, and push you down. And with your courage and perseverance, you stood out and become a role model to all of us as a musician, a mentor, and an extraordinary woman. So please share with us, now comes the first question, how has your cultural or personal background influenced your journey as a brass musician?
Yes, well, I suppose being an American in Germany, I did not share the mentality of the culture at the time. It was, I got my job in 1980, and there was basically no such thing as feminism in classical music at all. I was not, aware. I was not a feminist, I would say, back then. I just wanted to play the trombone in an orchestra, and thought if I were just as good as I could possibly be, win an audition and be nice to everyone, play well, then okay, that would get me through. And I found out that that was not the case at all, that there were other forces, social forces of just egregious sexism in the orchestra, and the conductor as well, of course. And so I think, I was confused at first, because I kept getting compliments on my playing, and from even my brass colleagues, and from brass colleagues in other orchestras. In Munich, there were at least 5 other professional orchestras at the time, and I remember getting compliments from brass players in the Bavarian radio orchestra. And so when I was told either she goes or I go by Celi Bidaki, the general music director, after a year, after actually totally overwhelmingly passing my trial year, I was necessarily confused, you can imagine. And it wasn't until he actually said, the problem, we need a man for the principal trombone, then a light bulb went off. And I realized there was actually nothing I could do to please him. I mean, I was like, well, I'll change my instrument, I'll change my mouthpiece, I can do anything you want. I was trained to do this. But that, obviously wasn't the problem. So in that sense, my culture was in a kind of a cognitive dissonance with the culture that I landed in when I won my job. So that also, I suppose, sustained me to a certain extent through 13 years.
Wow. Thank you. Is it still connected?
I don't know.
Okay.
I feel like I'm still here.
Yeah. So maybe we can go on then to the second question.
Sure.
Hello, Abbie. I am Lara from Spain.
Hi.
Thank you for being with us today. And I'm going to ask you, what does diversity in music and the arts mean to you?
Well, it means everything to me. And I think it should mean everything to everyone else as well. We're not there yet. But, what does really music mean if it isn't truly universal? If not everyone can participate, not everyone share this incredible body of music, then it just becomes a kind of club or cult. And music has this incredible power to unite and to speak to people without words and to uplift them. So if we don't have people of color and people of, LGBTQ and, the underrepresented, if we don't work at that, then, we're just in a kind of a questionable moral position. yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Hey, Abbie, I get the pleasure of asking the next question. Have you faced any barriers or challenges related to your identity in the brass music community?
Oh dear. Yes. um, yes. Not so much in school, in my undergraduate, nothing. I mean, when you're in school, then, you're sort of, in a sense, it's not the real world. And you're young and, everybody sort of gets along in general. I know sometimes there are problems, but I I was lucky, I think, in that way. It's once you get out into the real world when you're working that this whole kind of wall of sexism and racism and just about every kind of bigotry hits you, and you may realize, oh my goodness, why are those guys subbing in this orchestra? Why are these, why didn't I get that gig? Or, sort of kind of thing. And then I think it starts to dawn on you that there's a problem. And, of course, my story was extreme. And I think probably probably one of the only classical musicians who really held out to the end. And so I think that, the barriers that I had were mostly social problems and, certainly not musical problems. And I think that we need to teach students how to deal with these kinds of obstacles, with people trying to intimidate you or put you down or microaggressions, just out and out, comments about your body or or sexual harassment or these kinds of things. It's, I think a lot of young women especially think that like I did, that, if you just are really as good as you can be as a musician, and then, are decently nice to people, that everything's going to go okay. But there are these other forces. There's, as there's a boys' club. And orchestras are patriarchal. I mean, they're feudalistic practically. They have a conductor who pretty much has, a huge say in how things go. And people get scared and, afraid of losing their jobs or just being harassed and miserable. So, like in my case, I kind of became a pariah for a while because, being a friend of Abbie might, make you a target of the general music director kind of thing. And thankfully, I don't know, I had this kind of almost oblivious sense of things so that it didn't, penetrate into my soul too much. I just kind of kept going with my philosophy. If I play well, I'll be fine. But, there are just, like I say, there are these other forces that can really knock you off balance and really make you feel a kind of terror. And, and if you're not, really careful, can affect your playing. And I think, there should probably be a book written about, typical ways that you're treated in this kind of atmosphere, because there are patterns, absolute patterns, and it's the same old playbook over and over about women and minorities in orchestra. They tend to be the orchestra came out, is at its height in the 19th century, and there's a lot of mentality and thought that comes from that period, which we have so grown out of.
Unfortunately, not everywhere.
Sorry?
Unfortunately, not yet everywhere.
No. No,
Look
but I think it's really important to understand, the system and the structure of the orchestra and how it makes people act. When you're put into a kind of system like that, it kind of creates these roles. I mean, there's a hierarchy, there's the principal, and then there's the second, and then there's the third, and then there's somebody who plays bass clarinet and contrabass clarinet and all that stuff. And it's kind of like a little bit like the military, isn't it? I mean, and you have, and that engenders a certain behavior, and there's people are fighting in a sense for their sense of status constantly, and maybe not terribly supportive because they feel insecure, and they're not also fully respected by the system in the sense that the conductor has all the power. And so if the conductor criticizes you, well, then you can lose your sense of self-respect, and you can become insecure, and then that can affect your playing and that kind of thing. And we've grown out of that kind of authoritarian system, and yet we're thrown into it and can become very confused and very hurt by it. It favors men. It favors the dominant culture.
Thank you. So let's go on to the next question, maybe.
Hi, Abbie. I'm Kathy, joining you from Canada. Again, thanks so much for being here. Our next question is, were there any female role models or mentors who inspired you to pursue brass music?
No.
It's a quick one.
Yeah, no, I mean, there really weren't. I really thought about this, and, I was somewhat semi-aware of some really great women trombonists somewhere out there. And a couple of them, because I went to National Music Camp at Interlaken and Interlaken Arts Academy, I knew of a couple of women that were fantastic and should have had jobs when they, after their studies in undergrad even, but they didn't. And, so I thought, well, that'll probably happen to me, I guess, geez. And I guess I guess if you don't have a role model, you have no preconceptions of how things should be. And I just sort of went forward somehow. Thankfully, had really great teachers, and teachers that sort of, I suppose, didn't try to mold me into something like, a lot of teachers seem to want you to be just like them and sound just like them and do just like them. And I just didn't have that mentality, I guess. I wanted to sound like how I sounded and figure things out as best I could by myself with their help, and go in a direction that interested me. So there were few women in, like there was Susan Slaughter and the St. Louis Symphony. There was Gail Williams the horn player in the Chicago Symphony, who sat next to a major predator. I don't know how she made it, but she did, and she's an absolutely awesome horn player. Susan Slaughter sat next to a rapist, and let me think. Oh, then Rebecca Bauer in Pittsburgh was constantly harassed by her brass colleagues. And that was the time when Lauren Moselle was GMD there. And they would put porno pictures in her music. So she'd open up her music at the concert and there'd be this horrendous porno photo. And on the tour bus, they would pass around dick pics, if you will pardon the expression. And you can imagine that made her feel like one of the boys. And somehow, after a long period of time, that resolved. But meanwhile, she went through a kind of hell. And I think that is the case, especially with women brass players. It may be the case with even string players, for all I know. There are many cases of very predatory concert masters, for instance. So, goodness. Yeah, I think, does that answer your question? I hope so. No. As I said. Later, I found out about these women and their stories. But I guess I was pretty early on in the game and getting into a major orchestra, and I kind of assumed that everything was fine in America. But then oh my gosh, I found out that the same kinds of things, and maybe in some cases worse things, were going on in terms of gender discrimination in the States. In classical music, I think your general classical music lover and audience member has no idea that we play this lofty music, and that the orchestras, the behaviors can be so crude and egregious. They're always shocked. I had no idea that this was going on. Yeah, that's what goes on. And that's what the DEI committee can really, help to bring to an end.
Yeah, let's hope so. Thank you, Abbie. So maybe we go on to the next question.
Yes. Hi, Abbie. This is Chris McDonald from the New York City area.
Hi.
So let's talk about the current state of representation. What is the current state of representation of diverse genders, ethnicities, or cultural groups in the brass field? Do you think it's becoming more inclusive over time? And we are talking specifically about women in brass sections of the bands and orchestras.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's improving, of course. Yes. And at the same time, what has made it improve or sped it up, I would say, has been more activism. One of the things that I have done, and I suppose you've all heard of Catherine Needleman, is simply post all these sort of bro brass pictures with no women or maybe one token woman in them, and you basically, it's one of those a picture is says a gazillion words, and it's really upset a number of sort of as Catherine calls them, big fancy men in with big positions. They're either famous teachers or famous orchestral players. And because it's just, there it is. This is what's going on. So that's made a big impact. Then the other thing I think had some kind of impact was collecting over 500, maybe 600 photos of women trombonists, and just putting that online on social media and letting everyone see that we're out there, and I think it was a big shock to a lot of the male trombonists and brass players. We've kind of been in the shadows because so many of these photos of festivals and orchestra concerts, band concerts, there's just a whole line of men in the pictures. And we need the images of women with their instruments or playing or something just are so powerful. They're powerful for young people and girls that see, I never saw a picture of a professional woman trombone player, let alone a group, more than one, in any kind of photo. So that's really, I think that's a major force, is just that we show up and are seen. So that's one thing I think that your DEI committee could work on. It's just, how great would it be to just, you'd collect thousands of women holding their clarinets, right? And then just put that on social media and then ask the question, well, why are there so few women in top positions? And let people deal with it. It's kind of, I think, kind of embarrassing for the people that are in the top, the men in the top positions, to see these things. It's ridiculous. It's time has passed for diversity. It's just, come on, we're done. We're not going to accept it anymore. You should be embarrassed, There's probably other things I could say. Tell me again, repeat the question.
Sure. Well, we were talking about the current state of representation of diverse genders, ethnicities, and cultural groups.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
Is it?
I got it. Yeah. What another recent story is the Curtis alumni trombonists got together. I think there were about 12 of them, and they wanted to do a trombone ensemble concert, and they had all studied with a particular teacher, Glenn Dotson, and they of course put up their bro picture, no women, and so I saw that, and it's like, well, my goodness, I actually know of a couple of women personally who studied at Curtis with that teacher. And so posting that picture, to me especially, it looked ridiculous and silly almost to not have any women in it. And so after a lot of back and forth on Facebook, basically, finally, they asked 2 other women trombonists to be in it, because it wasn't that you had to have gone to Curtis. It's just that you were somehow associated with this teacher. That means maybe one of the students had taught you, or you worked with somebody, who went to Curtis, blah, 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 right? So they had no defense, in terms of not including women. And so they did that. And then there's another caveat here. that the women that they chose, I think, which is kind of a good thing, they just thought, well, I'm just such a fine player. They wanted me included. When actually, if a couple of us that are actually activists had not made an issue of it on Facebook, they wouldn't have been invited. So, but I'm kind of used to that. That's okay. But we can't forget that we do stand on the shoulders of the pioneers, of the women that forged ahead. There was actually a woman horn player in the Chicago Symphony, principal horn, during World War II and afterwards, disappeared. And there was a woman bass trombonist, I think, in the Cincinnati Symphony. Nobody ever talked about her. There was I think a second or principal trombone in St. Louis. And I was shocked to find that out sometime in the late 80s. Just silent, no one talked about her. And there was a tuba player, I think, in the Florida Symphony for years. Nobody talked, it's just like she didn't exist. So I guess my point is that we really need to support one another. We need to speak up, no longer, don't be afraid anymore, because it is past time. It is past time. They've had plenty of time to integrate and to diversify their sections. And so I think we can move forward with just that sense of power and being in the right, because not being inclusive is a moral problem. It's simply not right anymore. It doesn't look right. It's upsetting, and it's high time.
So true. Thank you. Thank you, Abbie.
Sure.
So let's go to the next question, maybe.
Hello, Abbie. It's
Hi.
nice to meet you. I'm Tyler. I'm in Michigan, which is wild because you mentioned Interlochen. It's very cool how small this world is. That you went there, and I'm here. It's just a few hours away from me. So the question I have is: are there any composers, musicians, or styles from underrepresented communities that have influenced your playing or repertoire?
Yes. Okay, I can think of two for sure. One is my underrepresented husband, who's a composer. And I would say he's in a category of one, so far as I know, and a male feminist composer who has dedicated his life to really into activism for women in music, and in composition, and also in orchestra and jazz, in every direction. And together we created these pieces of one-woman shows, basically, that are all about women in our culture, or women trying to be artists in their culture, and the oppression that they face. And the first one that was not based on Samuel Beckett texts was his text, and it was a trilogy called Miriam. And when I performed that piece, it wasn't directly at all about me and the orchestra, but emotionally it was. And actually the city of Munich, which was my employer, tried to get me to stop performing it. because it upset them, And so just to illustrate that the power of music, and that in a sense, being up against City Hall, my employer of the Munich Philharmonic, we basically turned my struggle and my pain, both of our pains, so to speak, into art, into music, that could speak to a wider audience, and somehow also kind of as a release, because when you don't, there isn't the consciousness around you, the feminist consciousness and the respect of women. You have to turn to art to speak for you. And so in that sense, I had to kind of represent myself and represent women artists in general through that piece. Then the second composer that I worked with was Pauline Oliveros. She was really interesting. She was a lesbian Hispanic composer from Texas, and she was all about inclusivity in not just in every, so racial and gender and all that. It was more like total inclusivity, in the sense that she worked with not only professional musicians, but also together with non-musicians, people who did not play an instrument, didn't sing, nothing, so that they could participate in the kind of awesomeness of music. She created pieces, sonic meditations, as one example, where non-musicians and musicians could actually create a musical atmosphere and create music, which is pretty amazing. And she was a big influence. She created something called deep listening. And it wasn't just about sound and music. It was also about deep listening in your entire life. One of her great, one of the things that she tried to do at every moment was listen to everything at once, all the time. That was one of her goals in life. And obviously that has an influence on your culture, on diversity and acceptance and compassion and being the ability to be with the other and to make the other no longer the other, but part of the whole. So that she was quite, she was a mentor, I suppose, of mine. And I guess also, in a sense, demonstrated the power of just being a human being who accepts all people, who has no barriers or, in a sense, or prejudices, so she was kind of a model for that. And also the way of listening to everything, to people, to music, to sound, to nature. Listening to your entire environment is kind of a very basic thing that helps you understand others and connect with them. And music happens to be a huge part of that.
Thank you, Abbie. This was so beautifully said.
Thank you.
So maybe we go on to the next questions. We have so many more. We want to
Yes.
know everything.
I have the next one again. Hello again, Abbie. How do you personally work for inclusivity when collaborating with other musicians or mentoring aspiring brass players? And more generally, what role do you think musicians can play in promoting diversity within classical and brass worlds?
Yeah. Well, it connects to what I just said. I think my basic philosophy is to embody the values of inclusivity in the sense of just being present as a person who truly believes in inclusivity, diversity, and equality. It kind of radiates out, and that is really what speaks. I think it also, in a sense, influences one's playing. And so when you're kind of around colleagues or students they sense and they see through just your beingness another world, another possibility. And that's kind of always been my basic way, my basic philosophy. Instead of saying, oh, you should respect everyone, nobody wants to hear that because everyone thinks that they're doing that, I suppose, right? But that's due to social pressures and not a terribly enlightened atmosphere, and maybe perhaps a background that was not particularly enlightened. Everybody thinks they're right, but if they experience you as somebody who has no prejudices and doesn't put up barriers to anyone, doesn't put people down, doesn't talk behind their back even, or just invites them into a kind of, I suppose, harmonious, comfortable, accepting world. That, I think, is in a sense the strongest statement. Is living this ideal, living this truth, living the beauty of inclusivity. And it's a constant thing we all need to work on every single moment. And it takes clear intention to do that. And then it starts to become a habit, and then everything that is not inclusive sticks out like a sore thumb. So that's sort of my approach. And obviously I call people out on social media too. That's important. But if you can, how should I say, in some ways, you want to be effective, and you don't necessarily want to have kind of a angry opposition with people who are just being, bigots. But so you need to be an example of diversity and inclusivity, but at the same time, time's up, and you have to call people out, and they have to deal with it because it's just simply wrong. So that's kind of a dual approach, I suppose.
Yes, you were doing it also always so respectfully. So Actually, you put the finger right in the wound, but yeah, like kind of, yeah, but this is for your own good too. So I always admired your work. Thank you for this answer. And maybe, how many questions do we still have, Stephanie? 2 more. Okay, maybe we go on so people can also ask questions in the end.
I hope so. Yeah, that would be great.
Hi again.
Hi.
I ask now, what initiatives do you know that have been successful at increasing diversity in music education or performance opportunities?
Oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Just,
Yes.
sorry.
Well, what initiatives do you know of that have been successful at increasing diversity in music education or performance opportunities?
Yes. Well, something that's been extremely effective is blind auditions all the way to the including the finals, like they do at the Metropolitan Opera. That has produced, people of color and women in their orchestra. And that they have actually, there was a big study done, I think, probably in the 80s, about blind auditions and how they overwhelmingly increase the number of women that get through. So that's a very effective initiative, and that should be demanded, I think, in all auditions for bands or orchestras or anything. Yeah, there's a famous story actually also about the Vienna Philharmonic having, I don't know if they had a blind audition, but at least for the first round. And then this fantastic violinist turned out to be Asian. And so, of course, they were totally rejected him, even though he'd studied in Vienna and knew the Viennese style, because he didn't fit, the sort of, what they expected as their Austrian sort of cultural profile. In other words, he didn't look like an Austrian. So, there's that stuff. It goes on, unfortunately. What does the person look like? Or if they're disabled, or if they're, a person of color. That it's how a musician plays, how they sound. That's the only important thing. They'll find out if it's a nice person soon enough. But those are just the things that colleagues have to deal with. That's fine. So that's number one, I think, blind auditions. Let me think. Well, the initiatives of just the photographs on social media, just pointing out the bro pictures without women, and just the images of women, playing in ensembles, and even, just playing solo on social media affects more than I think we understand, because there may be some little 11-year-old little girl, down in Chile or China or who knows, who sees, oh my goodness, that's amazing. I want to do that, So it's images, just presence. I think whatever you can do to engender the presence of women through images, videos, whatever, that's very effective. It normalizes the inclusion of women and the underrepresented. So in other words, it's kind of like, let's represent the underrepresented at least through images. And then it becomes normalized. People see it and say, oh, okay, wait a minute. This orchestra has an entirely all-male brass section. That's weird. almost creepy. I think at this point, it's just like, yo, that's strange. And it creates a very unhealthy environment, in my opinion. You know? We all know what happened in the New York Philharmonic. You know, the very first woman brass player and the second, I think, woman brass player. You know, what happened with those two. So it's got to look weird and creepy, I think, when it's an all-male photograph or presence in an orchestra or even a band, right? I think the Washington Army Band, for instance, I think right now has no women in the trombone section, if I'm not mistaken. And that looks weird. You know, well, what happened? So I guess those are two initiatives. And then I think, you know, your DEI committee, you know, I could imagine that there's a lot of pushback. Is that true? From sort of the big fancy men, so to speak?
Especially in Europe, yes.
In Europe, especially, yeah. And it's like, they probably say, oh, you're just a bunch of police people, right? You're policing us. And it's like, well, we wouldn't have to exist if you were fair. If the playing ground were level, you know, you wouldn't even have to be there. But you're there to try to bring consciousness and evolution to your community, you know, the inclusion of the underrepresented. And so I don't think you should ever feel intimidated in your role or feel that, or if they say, you know, you're just too present or you're doing too much or you're too pushy or you're just being policeman. It's just, well, you know, we're here to make sure that you act decently, that you don't seem to have the moral compass to be inclusive. So that's why we're here. And as a reminder and as advocate for diversity. And so you should, I mean, like I say, time's up. It is just up. And so you just go for it. That's my feeling. Don't be afraid. You know, you have nothing to lose because there aren't that many people of color and women and, you know, in high places. So I encourage you with all my heart.
Thank you. Thank you, Abbie. So maybe Vince, you want to read the very last question we have, and then maybe we open up for everybody who wants to ask you some more things.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning, Abbie. My name is Vince Dominguez, joining you from Providence, Rhode Island. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I have the final question of the morning. Do you think the brass music industry is doing enough to support musicians from diverse backgrounds? If not, what should be done in the future?
Yes. No, obviously, you know, or we would see more results. It is getting better. The one thing that I've been noticing is that like the International Trombone Festival, the instrument makers, there are a number of, you know, these posters advertising, you know, sponsoring trombonists. There are more women in the posters, which I think is really important because thousands of trombonists attend that. And yeah, also they have a youth department in there, and they'll see these women on those posters of instrument makers. That's really good. I mean, also it's just good marketing. They see that, oh my gosh, you know, in the school bands and orchestras, there's more and more women. And so, market to women too, not just men. It's just practical. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I can think of that, I spend a lot of time just simply trying to call people out and speaking up, not always so directly, but also indirectly. And I think, again, going back to images, the normalization of inclusion is just key to movement in this area. And once the sort of status quo realizes that it's absolutely no longer tolerated, zero tolerance, then they will have to change. And because, never forget, you're in the right. They will argue, oh, we just want to go by, the best. We just want the best. Well, that's impossible if the playing field is not level. They're giving themselves all the advantages and all the leg ups, all the support that not in the in the underrepresented people. They're not getting that advantage. So in a sense, they talk about, well, it's just competition and we just want to pick the best person, the best player. But if everyone is not included in that group of competitors in the first place, they're actually creating the disadvantage. They're not, how shall I say, they're not, it's not fair. They're rigging the system for themselves, for the dominant culture. That is starting to crumble, just starting to crumble. Europe's actually, I think, doing better in terms of women trombonists, with the professorship in Berlin and the recent win in principal trombone in Leipzig, the Gewandhaus. It's huge. And there's just Isabel Dawes in Belgium. There's, and in Great Britain, there are a number of women in prominent positions in orchestras and in teaching positions. So, there's way fewer orchestras in America. That's part of it, but right now, I think there are, in the major orchestras, I don't think there are any principal trombone players or trumpet players. I think that's a current situation. Oh, I had something that just slipped away. Just repeat the question, so maybe it'll jog my memory of something I wanted to say.
Of course. Do you think the brass music industry is doing enough to support musicians from diverse backgrounds? If not, what should be done in the future?
Yeah, okay. Right. Yeah, I think some of it is giving more support and perhaps even reaching out to students, giving them perhaps even Zoom lessons so that they can be kind of mentored into a better position, to get a better position. So really being proactive in that sense. I know of orchestra musicians who've raised money to buy better instruments for talented students. And that's something that can be done.
Substitute players.
And yes, and asking, like if you need a sub for a particular gig or orchestra or what, and then really, really looking for more diverse players, and really thinking about that, and really giving a leg up, so to speak, because that's what the dominant culture has done. And it obviously works. Opening the door for someone, is huge. Just speaking to a student who may not have a lot of support, even from their teacher or from their environment. Somebody who, a teacher at a university or an orchestra position or some sort of even a jazz band, a big band. When you speak with respect and with a kind of encouragement to a student, it can change their lives. So those are a few things that can be done.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to our committee, and we will be sharing this recording on the ICA YouTube channel after the fact for more viewers to watch your incredible story. We appreciate your time so much. I'd like to invite anyone who's listening to our committee meetings. They are on the last Sunday of the month at 10 a.m. We will have some time for questions, but I will stop the recording here. I just wanted to remind everybody that our meetings are open to the public, and if anyone wants to join us Sundays at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, just email deia@clarinet.org for the meeting link. So I'm going to stop the recording, and if people have questions, we can unmute or use the chat.